Hello, good evening and welcome. You've just entered the arena. I'm Michael Coren, and what a show we have for you tonight. I'll always say that, obviously, but it is a particularly good one. Now, we're all terrorists at Sun News. I didn't know this until now. I thought I was someone who deplored and condemned terror, who believed in turning the other cheek, and who tried to read, write and think his way through contemporary problems. My colleagues at the television network seem rather similar, really, gentle souls mostly, some with fierce opinions, but none supportive of violence and terror. But apparently I got it all wrong. It must be so, because some genius who taught journalism at Ryerson University in Toronto has told us so. And you know what he said: if you can't do, teach. If you can't teach, teach Jim. If you can't teach Jim, teach journalism. One John Miller, writing of a fun weekend Ezra Levant has planned for Sun News hosts and supporters who want to pay to attend, has written this, and I quote, "Makes you wonder when was the last time a group of ideological warriors went north to train in the backwoods and plot to storm Parliament, blow up the CBC, seize the airwaves and spread terror across the land. Oh yeah, the Toronto 18 did that. Didn't police arrest a lot of them and call them the gravest threat to our democracy? I think a weekend with Ezra and friends could be something just like that. The only thing that sets them apart from the Muslim extremists is that Sun Media will be charging you admission." Now, I have to admit that I'd not heard of Miller before this, and that he posted this dross at the end of last year and that nobody even knew until this week rather testifies to his lack of profile. Mind you, his website is worth a read. You've got to go there. Other than proving that the man is an appalling writer, it's also so bursting with hubris that I initially thought, really, it was a parody. Quote, "My unique journalism experience makes me sought after as an expert witness in legal proceedings. I am also an award-winning writer." He calls himself the journalism doctor and so on. Hey, if you get a chance, read the book Diary of a Nobody. Wonderful. And the incredibly self-important and unintentionally hilarious character Charles Pooter. OK? Do that. But while old Pooter is harmless, old Miller has worked with the Canadian Islamic Congress. Who are they? Well, remember Mohammed El-Masri? He was the CIC, and he explained on my former show that every Israeli over the age of 18, Jew, Muslim, Christian, male, female, gay, straight, black, white, pacifist, whatever, were valid targets for death. So Miller seems to have some, well, strange allies, making his accusation that we at Sun News are terrorists a little eccentric, to say the least. OK, hyperbole and wretched writing aside, this is far more important than some passing fool like Miller. It typifies the approach of the left of the establishment towards any media that they find objectionable. Rather than welcoming free speech and the open, intelligent exchange of ideas, they seek to control and silence, or simply abuse and libel. Look, believe me, the journalistic farting of some mediocrity with a website doesn't matter, but the attempt in Canada and elsewhere to dominate the conversation and stifle free speech is significant and dangerous. The event we have planned is called a Freedom Weekend. Hey, listen, it's called that for a reason. OK, this is great. As I mentioned, this week, someone called John Miller, a professor of journalism at Ryerson for 23 years and 20-year career at the Toronto Star, blogged that we at Sun News were just like terrorists, just like the Toronto 18. They, of course, plotted to murder the Prime Minister and blow up all sorts of people. So who's teaching at our journalism schools, and are they completely insane? Ray Hurd is one of the most experienced and well-travelled journalists in Canada. Great to have you here, mate.
Good to see you.
Now, do you know this guy?
Yes, I know him. He is what I call an upward mobile failure. Throughout his career, he's gone up the ladder, but at the same time, he's fallen down. Now, before we get into the substance of what he said, which in my judgment is grossly libelous, let me say this. In my experience, when I ran Global News, I used to hire kids from Humber College, Fanshawe, never from Ryerson Journalism School, nor even Western Journalism School, because I can tell you, Michael, and many of these guys worked for me at Global or the Montreal Star, where I was editor, journalism schools attract failed journalists of left-wing persuasions.
As teachers?
Many, yes. Many from the CBC. Now, you may not know this, but guess who the latest acquisition of the Ryerson Journalism School is? The guy who nearly destroyed CBC News, Tony Berman.
I thought he was at Al Jazeera?
No, he was at Al Jazeera, which is the propaganda arm of Islamo-fascists around the world. So guess what Tony Berman, before he virtually destroyed CBC News by turning it into an anarcho-Marxist propaganda agency, guess what he decreed? The word terrorist was banned at the CBC by Tony Berman,
oh, irony, delicious irony,
who now teaches at the Ryerson Journalism School.
Well, I spoke at Ryerson once, yes. And I heard that one of the teachers there actually screamed when he heard I was coming in, rather effeminate of him. But the kids who go there, they're fine, and I know some of the more conservative ones have a hard time of it, but it does have a reputation. You know, if you go to Ryerson, there are many high-profile newspapers, TV stations who will employ you.
Well, there are others that won't. They were always taking cheap shots at my friend and former boss, Israel Asper. Mm-hmm. And Izzy never said you have to do this, but Izzy discouraged people in Canada's biggest newspaper conglomerate from hiring students, because here's the problem, Michael. If you go to Ryerson, and there are exceptions, Matthew Fraser, who was one of the editors of the National Post, was one, but by and large, journalism professors, quote professors, unquote, because most of them don't even have undergraduate degrees, which is another story. Most of them are left-wing radicals who are almost hysterical. And these are the kind of people who denigrated and demonized your colleague, Krista Erickson, for her tough interview with a fairly talented Quebec dancer. So there's nothing really new going on.
Some of the people who've talked there, though, Rick Salutin, I may disagree with Rick, but he's very, very talented.
Rick would never call you a terrorist.
No, he wouldn't. Robert Fulford taught there. I mean, yes. I have my disagreements with Robert Fulford, but he's a highly intelligent and interesting man.
Sure, but there are exceptions who don't prove, who test the rule, because that's what prove means in this context. So no one can demonize all of them. That would not be fair.
I must say, as a journalist, I could never take the time off or take the financial cut to teach journalism. I did that at the very beginning of my career, 30-odd years ago in the UK. I do wonder, and I went to City University in London to do and then it was I got a big scholarship to go and study journalism after my BA. I had to leave because I was getting too much work as a journalist to stay at the university and study how to be a journalist.
But by and large, you know, I mean, I have lectured there too, and I lectured at the Kennedy School at Harvard. I went to Harvard, but the problem is, instead of teaching the nuts and bolts of journalism, how to write a lead, and with technology, how to work technology, most of these guys are ideological preachers of 1960
I tend to think that there is a tendentious ideological bent. But this guy, I'm not trying to be rude. I had not heard of him. Maybe that's my fault, but I hadn't heard of him. But what he wrote, when you write something, you look at it and think, well, maybe it's so childish. It's so hysterical.
Well, he was trying to be satirical. Satire is what closes on Saturday night on Broadway. So here, Michael...
Let's put the quotes up, by the way. Let's put the quotes up on the screen and people can read what they are.
So people know why I'm so angry.
Yeah. Okay, you can carry on there, Ray, while they're up there.
All right. So here's the solution for the heads of the universities, and I can tell you off the record, someone I know very senior at Ryerson. And to brag, Ray heard I brought Mandela and his wife to Ryerson to become a husband and wife who got honorary degrees. So I like Ryerson. I have two friends, Peter C. Newman and Diane Francis, who teach there, but they teach business, although they're journalists. The heads of the universities have to, without interfering in John Miller's free speech, have to tell these guys, you teach them the fundamentals of journalism and teach them that there are always two sides to every story instead of your anarcho-Marxist approach, which you probably inherited at the CBC.
Tell me, because I know nothing about the law or litigation, but if someone writes that the only difference between, well, I'm not named, well, I think I am named directly, between Michael Coren and the Toronto A team is you have to pay to attend the Freedom Weekend. I would have thought that's libelous.
Well, I'm not a libel lawyer, but I've been involved in libel cases, and I haven't lost one yet. All I would say is this. my judgment, and I had to make decisions at Global and the Montreal Star about stories, whether they'd go. In those days, we didn't have libel lawyers. By and large, what he said about you is libelous because he said you are the equivalent of an Islamo-fascist convicted terrorist who wanted to behead our Prime Minister.
Who knew?
Blow up the stock exchange.
Didn't know it was so exotic. Just before we go, people keep saying to me around here, mention Peter Mansbridge to Ray. I've always found Peter to be a very nice fella.
Peter Mansbridge is one of the best, what the BBC calls news presenters.
Yeah.
Someone else writes all the stuff and he reads it off the auto.
Fair enough.
But he's never been a journalist. The only attempt at journalism he ever made, which was an 18-minute story about a conspiracy against my boss at the time, John Turner, was absolute codswallop. So Peter Mansbridge, who has no university training, he was a ticket clerk at Air Canada somewhere in the far prairies.
So what?
But he is not a journalist. Now,
Does he claim to be?
His numbers are disastrous.
But does he claim to be a journalist?
Yes, he does, and that's why he wants to, he occasionally does stories. Peter Mansbridge is an unctuous, talk about an upward mobile failure, and let me tell you the reason I say this.
What has he done to you?
No, he's done nothing. I own the CBC. I'm a taxpayer. Lloyd Robertson, who was more of a journalist than him, Peter Truman, Don Newman, my friend in Washington, Knowlton Nash, they are real journalists. And a real journalist who reads the news, like Walter Cronkite, gets the numbers. Mansbridge's only major problem is he doesn't have the ratings, and this, unfortunately, is a commercial business. So and then they say, when I want to know what Mansbridge earns, because I'm one of the owners of the CBC, they say that's a state secret. That's absolute.
Okay, I wish I had more time, but look, I've only met Peter Mansbridge once or twice.
He's a nice guy.
He seemed a very gracious man. I think he does a very good job. Look, there are people at the CBC who are pushing their agendas and ideologies on me, and that's when I get very, very angry. I don't see Peter Mansbridge do that. I don't have this anger towards him.
No one says he has, but Knowlton Nash was a real anchor. And by the way, the youngest anchor in CB history with the highest ratings was Peter Kent, who's now a Harper cabinet minister. You should have him on one day.
Peter is I know Peter. He's a delightful man. I have huge respect for him. But I'm sure you won't be invited to Peter Mansbridge's parties. I never have been.
I've never been. But Michael, before we go,
all right.
Do you know the ultimate disgrace of the state broadcaster, which has been disclosed? They spent $75,000 on a party at the Toronto Film Festival, and guess how many bodyguards they hired for Strombolopolis? 3 bodyguards, Ray Hurd and Michael Coren, are paying for Bozo the Clown, otherwise known as Strombolopolis, to have bodyguards protecting him.
You know, I know George, and I like him. I don't like his show. I don't think he does a good job on his show, but I'm not going to use those. No, he certainly doesn't.
Except from me.
I think most people there wouldn't even know who he is, however.
No.
Good Lord, I seem so moderate compared to... Ray, thank you so very much indeed.
Well, good to see you.
Thank you.
I'll be back with more.